in. But we're so excited that folks are here today. We have an extra special, incredible guest in our midst. Kaz Marte, who is the founder of Conbody, which is described on the website as, let me pull it up quickly. It is described as a nonstop body weight, prison style fitness method that proudly hires formerly incarcerated individuals as fitness instructors. Kaz is also a proud new dad to baby Camilla Rose. And so, first off, welcome to Kaz. This here is our Act, Learn, Pray group, a very small but mighty and faithful group of parishioners from St. Mark's who've been meeting over the course of the past now over a year and a half almost, to connect and to have discussions around anti-racism, around how we can be better folks in the community and how we can better serve those around us, especially in the St. Mark's community and on the Lower East Side, and how we can just be better people. And so we're so excited to have you here today. A lot of us, as our homework before you came, watched your awesome TED Talk from 2016, but we're just really excited to hear your story. So first off, welcome, and thank you so much for being here with us.
No, I appreciate the opportunity over here to just share my testimonial for sure, and see how I can help in any way, spread the word, and be a voice.
Okay, awesome. All right, so we're really excited to talk to you about all sorts of things, including spirituality and physical and mental health, of course, the criminal justice system and your experience with that. But first, we would love just to, and of course, we're going to have a time at the end for us to all kind of talk all together and to ask questions and to do all of that. But I have a couple questions of my own. So selfishly, I'm going to start. So if you could first just start off by telling us a little bit of your story. So tell us about young Kaz. Where'd you grow up? What was your family like? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I grew up in the Lower East Side, exact street, 42 Rivington Street, between Forsyth and Eldridge. My mom immigrated from the Dominican Republic when she was pregnant with me, and we ended up in the Lower East Side. We grew up in a building, so the floor I lived on was all like first and second cousins. So imagine like 20, 30 kids just running up and down the hallway, just getting in trouble and doing all types of craziness, and then seeing craziness happen outside our window and outside our doorsteps. Things were happening in the hallway, that we saw as kids, or stuff that were happening in the rooftop. I felt like my mom's our playpen was the fire escape. My mom used to hang out the clothes up there to dry, and it used to be connected to another apartment that was my cousin's, and so we used to like pass notes or stuff through the wires and roll them from window to window. And that's how it was back then. But it was I feel like it was more of a community, but more dangerous. And now it's like a little bit less of a community, but less dangerous. And I remember our rooftop was pretty dangerous. It was always like homeless people shooting up heroin up there. They were selling drugs inside the building. And I remember as a kid just growing up and passing down the block and seeing like these long like drug lines. And every 10 steps you took, you saw a heroin needle back then. As a kid, I grew up, with my cousins, and they were my role model, and my older cousins were getting in trouble already, and so I thought, that was the footsteps, that was the things that I wanted to do. As a kid, people would ask me, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I would tell them I wanted to be rich, and that was like the first avenue that I thought I was going to be rich at. I believe like my cousins were wearing the chains and hanging on the corner with the cars and the girls and the nice clothes, and my mom, every time I asked her for things, she said she couldn't afford it, and she was like, maybe next time, or she never really bought me anything but socks and underwear from Orchard Street, where she negotiated for like $1 a piece or whatever. And I remember her going to like Salvation Army on Allen and Delancey and just getting all the hand-me-downs and things like that, or standing on the line at Nativity Church, getting the bread they used to hand out bread to everybody in the community. So we had to line up, with our shopping carts and stuff like that. So, as a very young kid, I saw we lived under the poverty line, and I wanted to get out of it. And so that's how I grew up.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing all of that, Costs. So can you tell us a little bit more about how you decided that you were going to get out of that?
Yeah, so as a kid, I had cousins that were already involved, like I mentioned before, and at 11, I started smoking weed with them. One of my cousins named Alex, we went up to my rooftop. He rolled a blunt, uh, some marijuana, and we just started smoking. And then I just got addicted to smoking marijuana back then. I was probably, just smoking like once, twice a day. And then going to school, people used to call me like Smokey the Bear back then, which is the nickname they used to give me. So people knew that I was a kid that was like smoking all the time. And then there was other kids that were smoking, and they would give me money to go down the block to go buy weed. And so I would get that money, go down the block, buy the weed, bring it to them, smoke for free, and that just became like a thing that I did constantly, after school. And so it became a supply and demand where it was like, why would I want to just go across the street, risk my life, and I could just make the money. And so I saved up $100. It was like 1996, seven, and I bought an ounce of weed, and then I sold it and I started selling it in school. And then I continued living that lifestyle. And I remember standing on the corner on Rivington and Eldridge, and that's when I first got involved with something more than marijuana. It was cocaine. Every corner on Eldridge and Rivington, Staten, all the way down to like Broome Street and Grand Street, there was like somebody that ran a corner where they sold drugs at. And so I remember standing there with the local drug dealer that was standing there. He stepped off the block. I'm just hanging out on the corner, and I remember a guy coming up to me and saying like, "Hey, can I get 2 bags of coke?" And I was like, "Oh, the guy's gonna come back. Don't worry about it." And he was like, "No, I need it right now. I'm gonna leave." And I was like, "All right, wait here." So I took his money, went down a block to stand at Eldridge in the next corner where I knew all the drug dealers. He gave me a deal off the bags, and I went to make a sale. And eventually, I just got into the game right away, and that's where I started understanding that game. And then we changed the way we sold drugs. So I became a drug dealer where I sold crack and cocaine on the corner, sitting on a milk crate, day in, day out. And then we changed the way we sold drugs in the early 2000s when the neighborhood started getting gentrified. So people from, everywhere, you see the gentrification happening, coming to the neighborhood, getting drunk. The bars, there was no real bars on Orchard Street, Lolo Street. There were a couple, but nothing like what you see today. And we saw people going into these spots, and we started, marketing to them. So we developed a delivery system, and from there it blew up. And by the age of 19, I was making over $2 million a year. I was generating $5 million in revenue a year. Had a business partner back then. Um, Operated a team of over 20 people, running around dispatching, making deliveries, bagging up, and all that stuff. Um, and everything ended at 23, and that's when I was incarcerated.
The first thing that comes to mind when I'm hearing this story is that, or there's so many things that are coming to mind, but one of them is like the sheer business acumen that a person who's that young has to have in order to be able to achieve something like that is so remarkable. And it's very clear because you've now shifted that business acumen to a legal venture now. But that the like brilliance that you had, even as being such a young kid, to be able to have the foresight to be able to make that, to to have that foresight to be able to, like, I'm going to change the game, I'm going to market in this way to this community because that's what's in front of me, is something that not a lot of other people probably would have seen. But that smarts were being used in a way that could then get you in so much deep trouble. That's the first kind of like thing that comes to my mind. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, as a kid, I was always like money hungry. I felt like money was going to solve everything, and I basically, like, when my mom came to this country and she was pregnant with me, we ended up in my aunt's couch, and so I was sleeping with my mom till probably I was like 5 years old, and so seeing myself in that situation and seeing other kids with other stuff, I I felt like things happened out of desperation, and I was like going into neighbors' couches, picking out the change under the couch, or going to the bodega and exchanging the bottles and cans for nickels, and dragging a big garbage bag down the stairs, or going to the corner right there in the park and just opening up the fire hydrant and washing cars. So I was just always like coming up with new ideas to get money, and that was just like, I don't know, maybe out of desperation, maybe out of just want and need to get out of the situation I was in.
Absolutely. And can you talk a little bit about what happened when you did get incarcerated and how that has now sparked you to where you are today?
Yeah, so I got incarcerated the last time at 23 years old. I was in and out of jail since I was 13. Was on parole probation since then, and didn't uh, leave the system till I was 30 years old. So I was in parole and all this stuff for 17 years. I was arrested 9 times. Mostly petty crimes for like smoking weed, but three major felonies for selling drugs. And um, when I went inside, the last time, it was a rude awakening where I felt, I something had to change, but it didn't come to me towards the end of my incarceration. But when I went inside, doctors told me my cholesterol levels were through the roof, and they placed me on medication. They said if I don't start eating correctly or exercising, that I could probably die of a heart attack within 5 years. When I was 23, I heard this, and I'm sitting in the physician's office in prison, and I'm like, nah, I'm not gonna die. Like, but they say my health is so bad that I could probably die. And they said, I was sentenced to 7 years, and with 5 years of, left in my life, I was probably gonna die in prison. And so I started reflecting like what that looks like, and in prison, you get a tombstone with a number. They don't give your body back, your state property. You're buried there. Um, and I started contemplating what I wanted to do, and I was like, I need to start working out. I started going right away. That same day, I went back to my prison cell, and I started doing like dips, push-ups, jump, all types of exercises that I used to do when I used to play sports when I was a kid. Um, and and I remember like doing it for like 5 minutes, and I just passed out, and I was like, this is way too hard. I'm not doing shit, excuse my language. And so I I lay back on my bed, and I remember the next day they called the yard, and they called the yard, and I woke up, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna go out there, and I went to the yard, and I started running in the yard. Um, when I started running in the yard, it was embarrassing, um, because I was the only person like running, and it was just not the norm. Like, people went out there to hang out or play handball, play basketball. They did do exercises, but nobody ran. And I'm like this big guy running circles around the yard, and I couldn't even run. I was running from one pole to the next, and then stopping and walking, and people making fun of me because I'm overweight and all this stuff. And I you just hear this like laughter. So basically, where I was at, there was like there was the solitary confinement cells facing the prison yard. So everybody in solitary confinement had a window or they were out in a rec pen and they see me, and so they're screaming from the corner of their cells, just like calling me all types of names. And so I just kept my head down and just kept moving. And there was times I stuck my middle finger up and tell those people "F you" and just kept moving. And that's what happened. And I went back to my cell and I started doing all types of calisthenic workouts. And I eventually lost 70 pounds in 6 months. And I remember, continuing to do this. That was my new addiction. I was not smoking. I was not doing anything. And I remember one day I'm like hanging out on a bench after a run in the prison yard, and this guy named Bus comes up to me, and he weighs over like 300 pounds, and he says like, "Hey, I want to start working out with you. I want to start running. I want to start losing weight. I saw you lose weight." And I was like, "All right, let's do it." And we just started running together, and it was just me like training him and coaching him, and it was nothing that I thought I was going to start a business behind it. It was just something that we built a camaraderie, and then the like couple days later he brings two of his friends, and then I bring another friend, and then we just started like a running group, and then a whole calisthenic group, and then I started teaching classes out there, and I helped over 20 inmates lose over 1,000 pounds combined. And that was just what I did. I didn't think anything about it. We just like held each other accountable and built this, beautiful camaraderie inside.
That's so incredible. How did you find within yourself the ability to look around and see that nobody else was doing the thing that you were doing, and that you, despite all of that, were going to continue doing that thing, so much so that you inspired others to lose a collective 1,000 pounds?
It was so in the yard, there's people walk around the yard. Sometimes they talk and walk, and so the physician, when I was sitting down, she was like, "I recommend you doing exercise. Maybe going out to the yard and walking. We're gonna put you on a they put me on a special diet, which means like no bread, and they give you one piece of wheat bread." And so I'm like starving, because if you don't have a family sending you money to buy food, like you're pretty much not going to eat. You're probably getting like 1,500 calories a day. And so I was like starving, but I just like, instead of walking, I just ran. I was like, this is like, walking is probably not going to do anything. I know that I'm going to sweat. And there was days where, it was, for a long time, I was like wearing a plastic garbage bag. So I'm like, I'm stealing the garbage bag from the dorm cells, and I wore like a shirt, sweater. I'm putting the garbage bag, and then I'm putting my coat, and then I'm running. And I was doing that like rain, sleet, snow. People just thought I was just like awkward and crazy, until I started like building. And I knew people from there. Like there was people actually from the neighborhood that, from the Lower East Side, that saw me, and they were like, "Yo," some of them called me names. Some of them were like, "Yo, I'm proud of you. You lost all this weight." And it was just it was crazy and embarrassing, but when I lost all the weight, I just felt good. I was able to like to tie my shoes without like bending my leg over, and things like that. I don't know. I just felt like I could move, and I felt like I could breathe again, after losing the weight.
I think that it's so beautiful that you, and we are a church, so thinking about it in the context of, you're this man who decided to make this change, you yourself going out on your own, a little like Jesus, and then around you, all these other men came to you too and said, "Hey, I see what this guy's doing and I want to go be like him." So that's pretty magical. So I wonder, was God moving in your life at all during that time? I know you had discussed talking about a spiritual awakening, so I'd love to hear about that too.
Yeah. So, at that time when I was working out, no, I was not thinking about God. I didn't want to think about religion. It was not towards the end of my incarceration where I ended up in solitary confinement. And so, um, 2 months before 2 months before my release, I was sitting in a cell, and I get called down by the prison guard. They have like this bubble where you go up and report to the prison guard. And so I go over there, and he tells me, hey, you have to report to the medical unit. So I'm like, all right, I got 2 months left. I've been waiting to see, in prison, you wait like years to see a dentist. So I've been waiting years to see a dentist. And so the first thing I'm thinking, I'm like, I'm going to the medical unit to, get my teeth cleaned and fixed or whatever. And so I run to the bathroom, I brush my teeth, and then I run down to the medical unit. And I got to the medical unit, and this officer says, hey, this is a random drug test. And I'm like, all right, whatever, I'm clean, I'm not doing anything. And so they throw me on the wall, and this guy starts searching me like very aggressively, and that's what they do most of the time. And he went in between my legs, and as he was going between my legs, I like twitched my waist a little. And as I twitched my waist a little, he punched me behind my head, and he said, today's not my day, don't fuck with me. And he knocked me down to the ground, and I got up and I turned around on the officer. And as soon as I turned around on the officer, he presses his button on his walkie-talkie, and that button sets the alarm for the whole prison off. And so I turned around on him to avoid a hit, and he said I was attempting to assault an officer. And so I start talking to him. I'm like, why did you do that? I'm just like turned around. I got up from the ground, blah, blah, blah. And as soon as I don't know, like 10 seconds later, about a half a dozen officers come through the door, and they tackle me down to the ground. They kick me, they cuff me, and then they throw me in solitary confinement. And when I went to solitary confinement, I was just devastated, devastated at the fact that it was not my first time in solitary, but it was my 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 belief that I was coming home in 2 months. And I remember like my my ex-wife at the time, she brought my son, who was 6, and I told him I'm coming home, and I lied to him. I didn't go home. I ended up doing an extra year in prison behind that situation. But while I was in that cell, the first thing you do is basically pace back and forth. And so I'm just like pacing back and forth, and just like stressed because I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know if this officer is going to put some press charges on me. They were saying that I was facing 3 more years in prison behind the situation. I felt like I was the victim. It was everybody's fault. I didn't do anything. I'm not wrong. And then officer comes to my door. He passes me a paper pen and an envelope. And so I quickly grabbed that. I started writing a whole letter to my family, letting them know they have to contact the inspector general of Albany to get me out of the situation. I need a lawyer. I explained everything. I wrote like 10 pages nonstop. I just kept writing I wrote it like a book, like vividly, the hit and everything. And then I enclosed that letter in this envelope, and then I realized I had no stamp to send out this letter with, and I was devastated that I couldn't communicate with anybody. I felt hopeless. I sat back in my bed, and I banged my head on the wall. And as I was doing that, I just kept thinking, like, what's going to happen next? I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to be in the cell for years, like my family's not going to know what happened. But they did know. They found out. My sister found it like curious that, I was not calling home. So I was calling home constantly. And so she calls the prison, and they tell her I was in solitary confinement, that the situation happened. And this is a couple of days later. So she writes me a letter. I don't know how long. I was probably there for like a week. And she writes me a letter and tells me to read Psalm 91 from the Bible. And she was like, everything's going to be all right. And I was like, I don't need Jesus. I need a lawyer. Like, I took that letter and was frustrated. I was like, I don't need to pray right now. And And I took that letter and I threw it in the corner of my cell, and I lay back on my bed, and it's the middle of like July. And so I'm in that cell is like over 100 degrees. There's no fan, there's no AC. I'm literally burning up. You have to like there's a crack in between the door, and they put one fan in the hallway to hit all the cells. So like to get some like actual little bit of fresh hot air, you're sticking your nose at the corner so you could get that air. And you only get 2 showers a week. Um, and I'm devastated. And so a couple days went by, sitting there, and out of boredom, I started thinking about the Bible, and I was like, all right, I had this Bible early on in my incarceration that my sister gave me, and she's like Mother Teresa's child, like super religious person, and she gave me this Bible, and I only used it as an address book. I literally like wrote down like all my homies that were being released from prisons, like name, phone number, and that's what we use Bibles for in prison, and smoking Bible paper. Like people were like rolling up tobacco with Bible paper because it was just like a thin paper. And that's what I used it for. I just had it there collecting dust, and that's the only thing that they can't take away. Even when you end up in solitary confinement, they take all your property away, but they give you religious items, whether it's the Quran, Torah, or Bible. And so I decided to open up the Bible, and I scrolled to the pages of Psalm 91, and it says, "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I'll say of the Lord, He is my shelter, my fortress, my God in whom I trust." And as soon as I read those words, a stamp fell out of my Bible. And it was the stamp that I needed to send out this letter with to my family, that I know the whole situation. And it's funny because like chills ran down my body, and like I felt like there was something that was weird in that cell, and this energy that came upon me. And I remember that happening, and I just felt freaked out a little bit. And then I lay back on my bed, and didn't open up the Bible. Took that letter, you basically stick it in the food slots so it could get mailed out. And so I put the stamp there, and then I'm just sweating in my cell, and just like dealing with the frustration of being in there. And then I opened up the Bible again, and I was like, I just started reading, and words popped out at me, and the stories popped out to me, and I felt so much regret for all the things that I've done in my life, for hurting not only my family, but the thousands of people that I dealt drugs to, and all the destruction that I felt like their families had to go through, like my families went through while I was incarcerated, or their addictions that, I fed because of my actions. And I started praying, and I said, God, can I pay back in a certain way? I don't know how I'm going to pay back this wrongdoings that I've done in my life. And as I prayed, like I just felt something come to my mind. I was like, I'm already helping these inmates in the yard work out, get fit, and doing all this. And I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to start a fitness program. So I took like the side of the Bible and these long file sheets of paper that they give you, and I started writing out like a whole spreadsheet. And so I wrote out like, I don't know, months of workouts, like in that spreadsheet, just coming up with stuff. I was getting like the milk cartons that that I was getting through lunch, and like calculating like calories and daily values and all that stuff, and just like self teaching myself things like that. And then I kept reading on the Bible, and it was weird. And I read the Bible from front to back in solitary confinement, and it was weird because I'm in a cell that's felt like it was over 100 degrees, but every time I was reading, I felt like it was 65 degrees, and I'm in the beach, and this wind of fresh air came upon me, and I didn't feel sweaty or hot anymore. And it was just something that I can't really explain. And so I kept reading on the Bible just to feel that fresh air. And I remember, during that time in solitary and then being released to general population. And I went to I had this bunkie, and as soon as I got to my cell, I had this bunkie. I see him on the top bunk is this big black guy. He's like 6'5", maybe like 300 pounds, huge guy. Afraid of like sleeping under him because he was like bending the bed. But I saw him on top of bunk, like reading these little small pocket Bibles that they give you in prison. And so the first thing I tell him, like, "Oh, what's up, yo? You read the Bible, yo?" And blah blah blah. So I tell him my story that happened in solitary. So he looks at me with this stare, like I was crazy. He was like, he just looked at me like I was crazy and was like, "All right, this guy's nuts." And so I was like, "I'm never gonna tell this story ever again." And you know, here am today, like sharing it nonstop, trying to share my testimony as much as possible. Um, and then I was released, and I was released from prison after a year of that situation, and then I did what I wrote. You know, I wrote out all these workouts. I wrote out a whole business plan. I thought about like what I wanted to do when I came home, and I did what I wrote. And I remember coming home, and it was just a whole different. It was a different neighborhood. It felt different, even though gentrification was already there. Um, it was 2013, and people like females wearing yoga pants jogging down the block, and I'm like, this was not happening. you know like what's going on here? And so that became like my target market. So I started going up to people that were like wearing gym clothes and running in the park, and I started telling them I'm doing this workout, and it was on Forsyth and Rivington. My mom still lives in the same apartment I grew up in, um, for the last like almost 40 years now. And so, yeah, I mean, we I started going out there, and it was hard to get clients. People looked at me like I was nuts when I was telling them I have this prison style boot camp. My first customer was my mom. She was like, I don't know, she's almost 70 now, but she works out 4 times a week, doing my workout videos now since the pandemic. But she she was coming to the gym and coming to the park, and was like my main my main believer. And then I started getting people from the neighborhood, and telling them, hey, I'm doing this workout over here. I'm doing this workout over here. And people looked at me like I was nuts, especially the guys that were selling drugs on the block, and saw me from making millions of dollars, to now like out there, taking a broken piece of pipe, and sticking it between wire fences, and trying to do pull up bar training out there. But I kept doing it. And eventually there was times where like some of those guys that were sitting on the corner got arrested, came home, and were like, hey, I need a job, and and some of them I try to help as much as possible. But I feel like, before you come to me, you have to change internally. And I feel like I'm a good judge of, choosing the person that is change, within. And as the company started growing, I went from park to renting out these ballet studios in 440 Lafayette. And I started booking out those rooms, and I started thinking about who I wanted to hire, and it was people that have been incarcerated, and those were my friends. Those are people that I grew up with, and those are the people that I knew, and so that became my mission, and that's my mission today, is to hire as many people coming out of the prison system to teach our fitness classes. Yeah.
That's probably the most beautiful testimony that I've ever heard. So
Thank you.
snaps for that. That's so incredible. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. I have two more questions, and then I want to open it up to the rest of the folks to ask their questions too. So my next question is about mental health. And I know that you've talked a little bit about how important physical health was to you, and is to you, and is to clearly your mom, your wife, and Camilla Rose, even though she's only 52 days old. But can you talk a little bit about your mental health journey and how you stay, and you talked about your spiritual health too. Can you talk about your mental health journey and how you stay mentally healthy?
it was extremely hard. I worked on my physical, I worked on my spiritual, but mental is a different game, and it's the combination of all of that too. But um, I came home with determination. I was like, nothing's gonna stop me, and as time went on, things did stop me. I came home to, I couldn't survive just doing like fitness classes in the street. I figured it out after a while, but I needed a job. And, going out to seek jobs, I went to like, I literally walked from like 34th Street, First Avenue, all the way to the West Side. And then I went up Times Square all the way to the East Side and was just knocking on doors trying to find a job, and I couldn't get a job. And I went, through every process I can to just get a second chance. But every time I filled out those applications, they always said first name, last name, and have you ever been convicted of a criminal record? And I used to hand those, applications over to the store manager, and they would look that up, and it was frustrating, and it was deteriorating, and it started messing up with my mental health a little bit. Like I felt depressed at times where I didn't want to get up. I didn't want to do this. My body hurts from doing so much exercising. Um, and there was times where I was like, I want to give up, and and then I started asking for help, and started talking to people, and I feel like that's what really helped. I have a therapist I don't see as often as much as I did before, but I consistently, text her and talk to her, every once in a while. And but back then I was seeing somebody to talk to every week, and that gave me a lot of clarity about the thoughts that I've had, the situations I've been through. I started explaining like why, my relationship with my father and the things that I had to deal with him. Um, you know, and it really made me realize, I didn't want to do the things that my dad did, and I wanted to rewrite the script and understand why I was acting certain ways, um, and it just became more clear to me, a lot more clarity, and feel like my mental health is in a good state right now. But it comes and goes. I feel like, yes, I'm probably at a good state right now, but there's situations that will happen. My cousin, not too long ago, and Frank knows about this. My cousin committed suicide, and Ann knows about this too. I found my cousin in the park, dead, um, maybe a few months ago. Um, and it was a sad situation, because we got these tips from like people, because we were putting up flyers everywhere, and people were calling us saying that they saw. One guy called my twin cousin, his twin brother, and said like, hey, we found the body in the park. We don't want to get involved with the cops. We don't want to call the cops, but this is the information. We were calling cops. They were going over there, skimming, not even really looking, and then they would leave. And then my cousin got the call back the next day, and he's like, "Hey, Cost, can you do me a favor? Can you go up there and check?" And so I went up there and I found the body, and it was sad to see, somebody that was, early 30s, just to give up like that, and he had a son, and I don't want to be in it. I don't want to put myself in that situation. I don't want to put my family in that situation. But it was things that he didn't work on, through his mental health situation, and I feel like, with more clarity, more discussion, more community, more openness, and just sharing, how we feel, um, could really change, our trajectory in life for sure.
I'm so sorry for your loss. That's so hard. So thank you for sharing that with us. My last question before we open it up to the rest of the group is around what we can do just as citizens, as parishioners of St. Mark Church, as fellow residents of the Lower East Side or folks who live around there, what can we do to be better supporters and better allies to our formerly incarcerated brothers and sisters? Because I think that hearing stories is such a beautiful way to just understanding who people are. Our culture does a really terrible job of putting folks who've been behind bars, locks them away. We never hear their stories. We don't know what they're up to. We don't see them. And then therefore we are distanced from them. And so I think that I would love to know if you have any suggestions of what we can do besides supporting Khan Body, which we all are going to, because we're going to go do a workout on March 12th. So start training now for the workout we're going to do. But what can we all do just to be better community members and community partners to our formerly incarcerated friends and neighbors?
Yeah, I mean, coming into the studio and like just meeting somebody that's been incarcerated, like hearing out their stories, understanding why they took that path, because everybody has a story, and I feel like I've helped them rewrite that script, and re-change the perceptions of their stories, because few of them, I think it was a couple weeks ago, I even had one individual was like, didn't tell me or didn't talk to me. He backed up with a month of rent. He didn't know what to do, and he was thinking of doing something negative. And then he took the courage and spoke to me and was like, "Hey, I'm in a bad space," and it was like, "I need this money," and I was like, "Here you go," um, and he was taking it out of his check little by little, but we're making sure we're balancing his books. We're now, we're helping him budget. We took out a bank account for him. He's never had an account before, you know. But just like meeting somebody and putting yourself out of the comfort zone and meeting somebody that's been in the system, whether it's like my people or somebody that you meet on the street, like listen to their story, try to change your perceptions on why they're acting out the way they're acting. Um, as you see, like on the Bowery and all the stuff, all the homeless people that are out there now, or drug addicts that are just, you know, that there was one day we actually did an art event. I think Nate, you didn't, but Frank went over there and we had an art event, and it was like we did a huge mural on Broome Street between Eldridge and I sold drugs on Eldridge and Broome, so we did a mural on that block, and the majority of the people that came were homeless people and drug addicts, and we listened to their stories, and we had them like just draw out whatever they felt, and their art, and it was like, at first I would myself judge them, seeing somebody talking to a tree and screaming and all this stuff. And then like I pass through the park every single day and see them doing that. And then they came across the street to join us on the art event, and I sat down with them and they started sharing their stories. And it was like, wow, now I understand what happened to you, and they became more sane at that moment when I was talking to them. But yeah, I mean, just putting yourself out there, taking yourself out of that comfort zone and just talking to somebody, listening to their stories, and try to change your perspectives.
Awesome. Thank you, Kas.
No, thank you.